Greetings! Welcome to the Speaking Candidly conversational series where my conversational buddy Elijah Whitehouse and I will discuss and all rant about varying topics from entrepreneurship to psychology to personalities and dating. So, today's topic we will discuss the important topic of entrepreneurship and employment. And especially given the boom of entrepreneurs since the past decade, I believe we should have a lot of interesting things to talk about. All right, so entrepreneurship and employment, what do you think makes the two of them different or similar to one another?
Well, I think they're both a path to accomplishing someone's goal or dream, right? Um, One is much more active and takes a lot more effort and energy, and it's not talking down to employees such as myself, who has a history of being employed, you know. But there's that certain kind of drive that you need to be an entrepreneur. But the meta goal is the same as you want to accomplish your dream and or goal that you have
Huh.
in mind.
I like the way you put it. Never thought about it that way. So that's something enlightening. I would say yeah, exactly. They're similar in the sense that they are pathways to achieving one's ultimatum or vision or goal. I think, of course, as you pointed out, different in the sense of what it requires to get there and the kind of obstacles and opportunities that present themselves for both different paths and how that kind of shapes you towards
Yes.
that goal.
I mean, now there's the whole type of there's the whole well, what's better, entrepreneurship or being your own boss or working for someone else, and it's also what you're
Yeah, I
kind of
think it's
after
not about
and
what
if you
whether one
care
is
about.
better or not. They're just different. And at the
Yeah.
same time, um,
Yes.
someone who is a good employee doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be a good entrepreneur, and vice versa. So I think
Yes.
it's the question should be phrased not as one whether it's better or not, it's more phrased as whether one is more compatible with that specific path or not. Some people just have that certain spark that just compels them towards the entrepreneurship, and some people just like having things to work with. They are set in place and have a system. And also, there is a system to entrepreneurship, but that's that aside, becoming an employee is like working with the current system that's given.
I've been employed for years on end, and um, I worked at a Dairy Queen, and I worked in the military for 4 years. So I'm used to that style of employment, where I get paid every week or 2 weeks and taxes taken out, stuff like that. And that's what I like, just that's what I'm used to. I know when I used to work in the game industry, it's the same thing, do some work. It's kind of the same thing every day being a QA tester, but you're getting paid, you're getting taxes taken out, and all that. That's fine. I don't have much experience or much knowledge of entrepreneurship and how exactly all of that works out, but I can only imagine it's probably a lot more
Yeah,
complicated.
well, having
uh,
been on both sides of the coin, I would say, I guess you already covered most of, being an employee and employment. I would mainly speak about entrepreneurship.
yeah,
People think that just because you put 100% or 10,000% into something that is definitely going to work as an entrepreneur, but it's not. See, the thing about the cruel reality of entrepreneurship is like, just because you invest your money into it does not mean that it will become something useful that people would want. So there's a chance of failing, a
very
higher
true.
chance than if you were an employee getting fired at a job. But of course, if you
Yes.
hit the spot right, the results or the payoff is huge. Either huge or, it's a sustainable, slow growing business. But ultimately, yeah, there's definitely more complications when it comes to being an entrepreneur versus being an employee. So on that note, we can move on to the next question, which is the psychology of why people, or why some, become entrepreneurs and why others choose traditional employment.
I could, I think it's just more of a drive, like maybe who people who are very ambitious and goal driven, and they just kind of don't want to work for someone else, who just have a vision, a goal, an ambition, and want to accomplish that themselves. That's why they would go
Well, I
the entrepreneur
see,
route.
just to
And
counter that, people who are
maybe,
also employees, they can be ambitious, but instead of starting their own company, they want to
yes,
climb up and become the manager or CEO. So I think it applies in both cases, but I guess what really separates the two, going back to the previous question, is personal freedom and control over the schedule. Because if you think about it, you can have ambitious
yes,
people on both sides. You can have slacking entrepreneurs and slacking employees on both sides. But what really separates the two is the control over schedule and personal freedom, which is definitely
yes,
a huge benefit for entrepreneurs who have, I mean, it's an illusion at the same time because you're working 24/7, but you have control over your schedule and you have that personal freedom, which as an employee you don't because your schedule is being controlled by somebody else. I guess going back to that question on why some choose the different paths.
mm. So my thought is like, it maybe it's with how they're raised. Speaking from an American standpoint, it's like maybe you live down south and you work on a farm, and your dad's like, hey, look, a person earns their worth. They work, and you go to a job, you give it your everything, and that's what you do. You have to listen to your boss, blah blah blah. And so we're ingrained to believe that, and we're raised to believe that, and then we go do it, and then eventually we'll find out, hey, maybe we do something else. But I think we just tend to just go with what we're taught. Most young kids are young adults are going to be getting like a normal
Right.
job
And
at
it's
like very
interesting that you
late
talk
in
about that
life.
because I totally agree on that. That the culture or the societal, socio-economical background does play a role. Like in America, it is
Yes.
lauded for entrepreneurship and innovation and stuff like that. That's why a lot of people, again, want to go to the US because of that. But in more conservative countries like Asia, Singapore, for example, um, yeah, we're considered like progressive, but again, most people's view is that you should get a job and work for someone and then work your way up, which is a very traditional Asian thinking. But of course, speaking on that point, the government is pushing more for entrepreneurs, but again, because the stigma of failure is very high in a country like Singapore, most people don't want to do that because they are afraid of failing, which is a great point to bring up too. I would say that the ones with higher risk tolerance tend to eventually become entrepreneurs than the ones with lower risk tolerance. Now, there's a lot of misconception about entrepreneurs liking risk. It is not true because entrepreneurship itself is actually higher risk than being an employee because you could go out of business and lose your
Yeah.
entire investment. Um, Entrepreneurs have to be good risk managers. So the best entrepreneurs are the ones that know how to mitigate risk instead of just diving head on with all the risks.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah, so I think that's also the difference in the kinds of people that are drawn to certain paths. Okay, so that's a good point to segue to the next part of this conversation. Is like, let's dive a little deeper behind the fundamentals of becoming an entrepreneur and choosing the life of entrepreneurship. Because I'm pretty sure we can agree that 70% or 75% of people are definitely right now in the employee category or they are somehow employed. And they are more seeking, some of them are probably seeking to jump onto that path. Again, we talked about it briefly, or I mentioned it. One of the fundamentals to becoming an entrepreneur is firstly becoming comfortable with risk. And also to me, when I transitioned from being a very disgruntled employee and even more disgruntled freelancer to
Wow.
and to becoming an entrepreneur and eventually some form of investor, I would say like it's definitely learning as much as you can, even things outside of your field. You know, people take for granted, like a lot of people, especially when they become employees at a company for so long, they take for granted about the knowledge they know. They think that knowledge is going to last them forever, which is not true because the environment changes all the time, the landscape changes all the time, business shifts all the time. Being open minded and learning about anything and everything is key to becoming an entrepreneur of any industry, really. I think the other important thing that most people don't like to talk about, or like most people think is unglamorous or controversial to discuss, is ruthlessness. So, unlike being
Mm,
employed or unlike being an employee, if you want, or if someone is intentionally choosing the life of entrepreneurship, is you need a degree
yeah.
of ruthlessness in terms of not only cutting out the noise or unnecessary people or unnecessary things that are interfering with your processes or your thought process or whatever, but also being ruthless when it comes to making decisions, making certain action plans and stuff like that. It's not all glamorous as what the media likes to make it out.
Yeah.
And definitely, if you want to thrive, a degree of ruthlessness is key.
Yeah, so there's a couple things I want to say on this topic because it just sparked some memories. The ruthlessness thing reminds me of Shark Tank, in which all those business owners are there, and the way they talk, it's like unless you're used to it, they sound mean. I'm like, oh, it's so mean, right? But no, they're business people, so they have to talk, with ruthlessness in there, because we're talking about big money, and then along with that, there was a video that I watched. It was like this guy was like, look, I love my dad, and he was telling me like about baseball, but like, who am I going to listen to? My dad or my coach, who knows what he's talking about? Like, I love my dad, but I am not going to listen to him when he's telling me how to swing a baseball bat. I'm going to listen to my coach. Business in its own way
It
is
is,
like
yeah.
war.
The ones that survive are the ones that knows how to. I mean, of course, everything. Even though ruthlessness is key, when it comes to customers, you
Yes.
have to make sure that they're happy, and it's always about win-win. But when it comes to making decisions or killing your competitors, that is just a necessary evil when it comes to business. Also, when it comes to firing people, of course, there is the difference between a manager and an entrepreneur, but in any of those
Yes.
instances, you know, you can't be soft when it comes to like firing someone that's no longer useful. Okay. Um all right, so on that note, to summarize on both sides, entrepreneurship and employment, I would say that going harkening back to your first point that you made, they're just different paths to get to the
Yes.
destination. None of, there's no one that's better than the other. Just certain characteristics of an individual makes them more suited to the other, but doesn't mean that that person might like it. So yeah, ultimately it's very subjective, um, and it again, it's just a different way to get to the end goal.
So I think the better term on my part is to say what are the differences between employee and entrepreneurship, and not what better. So I think I made a mistake in saying how which one's better. It should just be what are the differences
Okay,
between the two.
so that pretty much wraps up our discussion for today. If you enjoyed the discussion or learned something new from us today, go ahead and give this video a like and subscribe. Or join in the discussion too by sharing your thoughts in the comments. Now then, this is Vicki Lau and
Elijah Whitehouse.
signing off.